Everybody, wait a minute. Well, everybody, wait a minute.
Let me show these suckers how to ball out here. Oh, man, let me get this together here. Oh, layup. Oh, no. Shot. Oh, three. Oh, it's like Brick City out here. Mid-range. Oh, my goodness. I can't buy a bucket out here. I missed the whole damn basket. Oh, my goodness. What's going on, man? My game is looking trash. Oh, here we go. Black Power Media shirt. Now we cooking. Tree. I'm taking all three of y'all with these right here. Between the legs. Oh, my goodness. Behind the back. Layup. Oh, did he just do a reverse? He is in beast mode out here. I ain't got to look. It's falling. Oh, my goodness. This guy is going 3, 2, 1. Kobe. Nice. Black Power Media, baby. Nice. Empower yourself. Go get you some of that Black Power Media gear. Right here, blackpowermedia.org. Yeah.
I mix what I like. Hey, what's up, world? Welcome to another edition of I Mix What I Like right here, Black Power Media. Again, I'm Jared Ball. Very happy to be your host. Welcome, everybody. I do like it when I get my transitions a little smoother, but whatever. I missed it this morning. My bad. But that pocket, shout out to me for putting that mix together. That joint is fire. And welcome, everybody. Good to see those who are here live, those who will see this and hear this later. Peace and welcome to you as well. Definitely do all the things, hit all the buttons, show some love to those, show some revolutionary love to all the buttons and bells, and invite a friend to get some of this boom bap breakfast. Nathaniel, thanks for re-upping or upping. Yeah, and greetings, everybody. So right off the top, let me just clarify the lineup change this morning. Upon further review, Dr. Donna Murch decided she would not want to join me us this morning. Over the weekend, so we just I'll be honest with you, I don't know exactly what I would like to say or not say about when these things happen, but I had been in touch with Professor Murch on and off for I want to say it's going back a year, because her book was initially supposed to come out earlier. And when I saw it was headed towards publication, I was immediately interested and began trying to figure out an interview with her even before reading the book. I just knew I would want to read the book and then want to offer a chance to discuss, have a chance to discuss it with her. And we went, over time, we went back and forth, finally made some arrangements. Obviously I got the book, read the book. And then, but as I was reading it and actually just finishing it the other day, it became evident that there were going to be a couple of things where we disagreed, or I would at least want to ask some questions. So I sent her a note over the weekend and said, just as I often have done, again, going back even to when, shout out to Radio CPR, even back to when I was doing pirate radio 20 plus years ago at this point. I have always, I don't think there's even any exception to this. Especially if I was preparing in advance for an interview, I honestly, I can't remember if there's an exception to this. I feel like there isn't one, but I'm over, my memory is not, and I'm open to being checked. But my point is that I have always sought to reach out to the person and be very clear about where we disagree. A, because I don't want anybody to feel ambushed or to be unaware until live. And B, and this is my favorite, my most, even more sincere point, is that B, I want them to be prepared to respond. It makes the discussion better. It makes, and for me, if it's just a legit question, it makes it more likely that I'll get a good answer. And that's what I wanted. And so initially, so I sent Dr. Murch a brief message, and I'm not going to share. I'm not going to go back and share the whole chat. I'm not going to share, obviously, her. But I would, if I could pull it up, like to just read exactly what I wrote to her, because so I said, Okay, as I prepare for Monday, I'm seeing a few areas where we disagree and want to give you a heads up. I just never want anyone to feel unaware during the show. I'll do a brief intro, welcome you, and invite you to lay out an overview of your book. And I'll likely ask one or two questions just to help our audience, small but thoughtful. I always like to point that out. To make sure help our audience get the gist, etc. But then I would like to raise some questions coming from the perspective, admittedly largely shaped by Jalil Muntaqim and Dhoruba bin-Wahad, who have both over the years been critical of Assata Taught Me when not seeing her politics in the work of those making those proclamations. More specifically, the few mentions of Assata in your book reference her impact on Black Lives Matter at all as being more symbolic and iconographic, and frame this as a positive. I don't agree and tend to see that kind of symbolism as liberal corruption of the original. So I do hope to raise this and for us to discuss. But again, I definitely want to make sure you are given that heads up. Okay, thanks again. She apparently slept on it and wrote back a friendly note just saying she didn't want to get into a debate. And then my response to that was simply that I wasn't really inviting a debate per se, but that I was wanting that I don't want to deny having a disagreement and just wanted to raise the question and then let her respond. And that would be that. And that I wasn't intending any hostility, and I wasn't inviting a debate. Again, I wasn't inviting her to argue. But so I admit frustration around this, because on the one hand, I was looking forward to the conversation, and I don't mind disagreement. I don't think disagreement is inherently bad, and I certainly wasn't intending some sort of aggressive argument. But I also am bothered, admittedly, that some of it is personal. I admit that there is. I just have to, be real. Like, some of it is, like, I haven't even earned a conversation. But I can, obviously that's not the main point, and I can get over that. That's not a big deal. But my real concern is really the too often refusal of those to be willing to discuss their public work publicly and principally, with principle and professionalism and maturity, with those on their political left, especially when the subject material, as is the case here, is about, nominally at least, very left figures in politics. So if it's not here, that's fine. But I would like to see, and I looked around a little bit, didn't see any, but that doesn't mean anything. Just that I didn't do a hard target search of some kind. I just didn't see any initially. But if Dr. Murch shows up somewhere having a conversation similar or raising similar questions, please let me know. I would love to see it. It doesn't have to be here or with me. And again, but anyway, connected to that, and we'll get to some of this later on, is because I do want to go through some of what I read in the book and some of the questions I wanted to raise with Professor Murch. But some of it is I do think a pattern consistent with those she talks about in the book, and some of whom praise the book. There is something feel like I've experienced, and where there is this sort of hands-off, there is a and this is actually, here's a good segue. There is a sort of responsible, mature, professional way to engage progressive or left politics, and then there's the version that those more in the margins are characterized or defined as portraying. You know, you're still in that she obviously Dr. Murch didn't say this, or nobody has said it this way, but it's this feeling that I get that Jared, you're still in that immature left political space. Not pragmatic, not practical, not responsible, not whatever. And I don't know. So I don't know. It's unfortunate. But anyway, but we got it. But that I think is a perfect segue to get into what I had intended to start the show off with today, and then maybe even talk about with Dr. Murch, because I do, and maybe perhaps that's why it's not happening that way. That maybe there's more of an overlap here than I would have thought. But yeah, this is anyway. Let me just move on. I saw the other day part of an interview on the Gray Zone with Max Blumenthal and Christopher Mott about the Woke Imperium, and a white paper that Mott has written recently, and they were talking about the use of woke politics by the state. And I was very intrigued by the conversation. So I went and downloaded the report and read the report and want to look over that with you all as a sort of foreground into the conversation about Professor Murch's book. So that's why I had to change the graphic on the YouTube channel by the YouTube graphic cover for this show. And I slightly changed the title from With Dr. Murch, that is Assata Taught Me, to By Dr. Murch. So we'll talk about her work a little bit. And I do think that there is some overlap here. So oh, definitely. Ear Doctor killed it last night. And I'm glad I got to see that and hear that. Good morning. So as I just check through the chat a little bit and just say some greetings and good morning, I will, I'll just say again, please do like, share, subscribe, join if you can, all those things, invite others to join you this morning. But all the links to everything I believe are in the show description already. I got to everything. So it's funny that you say that. My man Dr. Haight sent me a clip of because he keeps calling me the math Hoffa of academia, which I take as an honor. I and sometimes feel is appropriate and not. I don't think debate is what I do. I think more discussion and public disagreement that we all know is taking place privately should happen publicly, and people should be able and willing to defend their ideas, especially when coming from people on their political left and from audiences that they are ostensibly talking to. So I would be honored if, and I'll come back to this, but if Dr. Murch and Barbara Ransby and Kathy Cohen and that wing of the struggle were ever to say, Jared, we read your work, or we heard, we watched your work, we, engaged your work, and we disagree, and we want to sit down with you and have a public, discussion of it, I would be honored by that. And I don't consider them to my political left. So in some ways, that's not the same. Now, when there are those who I do consider to my political left, or who are at least differently situated and do the same, I'm always willing, if not happy, to do it and honored by it. And maybe that's another part of the whole thing. I'm not in that same, I have not earned academically, the stature of Murch, Ransby, Cohen, and others. I readily admit that. I'm good with that. I haven't, and from their perspective, I haven't earned the right from an activist wing either, because our activism was in very different segments of the activist world. And I get that they have issues with the nationalism and the Pan-Africanism that I come out of. I know that they have issues with that. I know Dr. Murch doesn't agree with Afro-pessimism, just as another example, and has spoken publicly in condemning it. And I don't agree with that. Dr. Ransby and I have spoken privately, and and she has not accepted my invitation to publicly discuss. But my point is, I know that there are disagreements. I just don't understand. I just am not understanding why they can't be discussed publicly. I don't get it. There are things I could speculate as to why it wouldn't be. Some of them may be personal, which is again why I keep saying that's fine. And then I would like to, please let me know where these issues are discussed. I have not seen that wing engage those from sort of the wing I'm coming out of. I don't know. This is, so if they do, please let me know. And when I get to the specifics of the critique that I had of, or the questions that I wanted to raise with Professor Murch, if others hear where or see where she has written or responded or engaged this discussion elsewhere, please let me know. I don't have so I get it, Craig. I know there's some joke behind, I just am willing to do it because I think at some point I feel like you owe it. Again, to his credit, we wildly disagree, but at least on that one occasion years ago on my radio show, Peniel Joseph was willing to do it. Sort of, more or less. And I did the same with him. I actually sent him my questions in advance. When I tried to debate Zahir Ali, I told him I would send him and his entire research team all of my notes and questions weeks in advance, so that they could so that when they showed up, they would be ready to go point by point and click. That's what I want. So that's why I don't know. I feel like, I don't know. I don't know. It is, I admit it's a little frustrating, but it's also that, look, I've read her work. I know Dr. Murch is sharp. So I don't understand why. Look, and if it's just an issue of disagreement, cool, we could disagree and move on. I really was not, anyway. But it's all good. It's the same thing, like I said, it was about Richard Wolff or whoever. I mean, if they produce the work and do public work, it will be of value to us, and they don't have to engage me personally. Oh wow, that's ominous. Oh man, I don't know if I get the joke, brother Tafari. I might be. Yeah, Ear Doctor killed it last night. Ear Doctor, man, all jokes aside, is sharp as hell on those ones and twos. That joint was fire last night. Definitely go check it out if you missed it. The disagreement with Dr. Ransby was initially over reparations, where we had a little bit of a public exchange on Mark Lamont Hill's show last year, I think, and it did get pretty heavily edited. But I wanted her to come on so we could follow up and have a broader discussion. And we did talk privately, and I honestly don't remember exactly what she said, and I wouldn't share it if I did. But essentially, it was around. Again, I think it's what I'll get to when we talk about her book, Dr. Murch's book, is that I think it was around how I define the isms and the form of the struggle should take. I know there are disagreements over support of the Democratic Party. I would not sign that letter that Dr. Ransby and others put out during the last election, calling for progressives to support Bernie Sanders, because even that, I thought, and I wanted to even talk about that publicly. I invited that discussion publicly, but it was left in a private email exchange. but again, and I was trying to parse out the nuance, saying yes, Sanders is the best of the options, and those in the Democratic Party should support him. But as those who call ourselves radicals or progressives or whatever, I just don't think Bernie represented those politics legitimately, or his efforts within the Democratic Party would see the light of day. And I wanted us to do something very different. I was outlining even my after party idea and all that, and I just don't think she's moved by that. But again, I'm not really. It's hard to say exactly, because these conversations are not extensive. They're not, I'm not in their circle, and then we don't. Even though I'm technically in the scholars of social justice with them, I'm not. I'm just not. There's no exchange, so I don't know. It's not that she's a no-show, but Dr. Murch did cancel. She said she didn't, when I shared, and if you missed the very beginning, please go back, but at some point, but when I shared with her that there was some criticism, she didn't want to, I can't do it. All right, so let me move. I'm gonna share one more story in response to this right here, that from Easy D, and then I'm gonna move on, and then I'll come back to comments and questions in a little bit later. But years ago, at Morgan State, when Obama first got elected, there was a brother that worked in the department I was in at the time, and he literally said that he was going to write this. That once Obama got elected, he said, "Now I'm going to write the book that I want to write that explains to white people how to communicate with and understand Black people, because that's going to be a huge cottage industry opening up." He was very clear about this. He said, I want to cash in, and being the Black professor that helps white people communicate with Black people in the now Obama era, the new world. And I said to him, are you serious? And he actually quit. He quit. He was this committed. He quit his professorship. I think he was right behind me as an assistant or an associate professor. I think he was on tenure track, but he was this committed. He said, "I'm going to write my magnum opus, and I'm going to become what you're describing, Easy, as a Democrat shill." And I said, wow. I said, obviously I can't agree with the politics, but I said, more specifically, I said, Dyson already exists. Who else was I mentioning? I can't remember the full list, but Dyson was number one. I said these are wildly talented and skilled folks. It's not an empty lane you're trying to move in on. They've been carving out this lane. I don't think what you're doing is a good idea. I think you should keep your job and maybe try to start this as a side hustle, but I don't think you understand how crowded that space is, and certainly has become at this point. So even if I wanted to do that, to shill, I don't think I have the talent and the skill, because these people are not dummies. They're not untalented. I just don't think I have the ability, never mind the politics. I don't think I have the ability to knock them all out the box and do that kind of work. It's a crowded lane. So let's go, because that leads perfectly to what, you know what? Let's take a comedy break. You know what? I saw this yesterday. I quietly, you know what? We're going to use this as a segue, because I quietly, being from the DC area, quiet as kept, one of my favorite, admittedly politically inappropriate, huge contradiction, but one of my favorite comedians. I'm going to show you, I just saw this clip of, and what he says about the January 6th issue, which is something I'm going to come back to as well, because Dr. Murch brings it up, is, I think, a perfect little segue before we get into the Woke Imperium and Assata Taught Me. So let me pull this up right here real quick, and let's take a little a short little break with my main man, Earthquake.
All those Caucasian people running up on the Capitol. And I said, all I said, and I will say it again, I wish I was a police working that day.
Right.
Oh, I would have been pat, 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 pat. They're like, what you doing? Saving democracy.
Yeah. Give me a reload.
Yo, man.
Can you imagine if that would have happened at the Million Man March?
Oh, man. It'd be a million man. It would have been a million black men dead on the steps.
Yeah.
You know that, and I know that.
Yeah, man. What did you feel when you were watching that?
I just wish I was working that.
Right, yeah.
Oh, I would have shot every one of them. They would have to prove they wanted to overturn them. Right. They would have to prove. I would have been John Walker that. Pow, 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 sliding down, pow, pow, John Wick. Pow, 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 pow.
Grabbing other people's guns.
You ain't gonna use it. Give it to me. Calling my friends. Told you be a police ho.
Hey, man, and are you from DC?
Southeast.
So you've seen that area.
Yes.
And you protected it being in the service, thank you for your service. Yeah. So that had to look crazy to you, bro.
Well, it really looked crazy to me. And then
and they did it in the name of democracy.
And so many people died in defending or trying to give democracy to other countries. And to see a certain portion of this country feel hell with your vote. You understand? This is who we want, and your vote don't count. And that's all it was. He was like, certain people, you just should be happy to be in this country. And certain people in this person dictate what's going to happen in this country.
Yeah, man.
And we just going to tell you, like, here, this is how we want it. That's why you hear us say, make back America great again. And I asked all my white friends, when was that?
Right.
Because I bet you whatever day you pick, my people was catching hell.
Yeah, make America great again.
So you sit here talking about make it great again. And I don't know why you mad at us. You should be mad at the white dudes that left you back here with us.
Right.
You understand? Because everything is in your image. Take your country back from who?
Right.
From who? Everything. You own everything. Everything in your name. Every story is told about you. Your story is always told. You sitting down here, so I don't understand it.
Yeah, what more do you need?
No, I understand because I say it all the time. You got the white away. You just want your way. That happen to be white.
I heard that.
And now you see that card of being that pigmentation of white is not getting you as far as it used to be. And I'm going to tell you like you used to tell my ancestors and my mother and father, pull yourself up, your bootstrap up, and make the great out of this country.
I heard
now,
that.
Now use that same medicine you gave us.
Oh man, shout out to Earthquake. Shout out to DC, man. He is so DC. I love DC, man. Man, there's a lot of cats funny like that in DC, man. Everywhere, obviously. But he just so DC. I love it. I love pat. He said they'd had to earn, they'd had to show that anyway. They'd had to earn you anyway. Told you should have been the police, he said. Oh man. Anyway, let's get to this real quick, man. That was funny as hell. Let's get to this Woke Emporium real quick. I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like. So there is actually two other quick notes I gotta make real quick. One, I did want to clarify that when Ear Doctor brought up his name the other day, I didn't recognize what he was saying, but George Schuyler, as I've always pronounced the word, the black journalist was who we were talking about, and I had actually just been reading about him in the work of Dr. Jessica Gordon Emhard, who I'm going to probably come back to on this show because she uses his argument around black consumer power in a way that I think is understandable, but I think I don't agree with entirely. So I want to, but that was the one thing. So I forgot. I just didn't. It didn't click that morning when Ear Doctor mentioned it. So if I'm not pronouncing his name right, but I've always understood it to be Schuyler. I'm just going to say the Sesame Place thing. I was late to that story. it's madness. Maybe we'll talk more about that on the remix. And then the only other thing I wanted to say, I couldn't, since the conversation we had with the ear doctor on Friday, there was one part of that always, our back and forth over politics and economics, and his argument around you have to start your own. And that phrase, which is often repeated, we have to start our own. We got to get our own. Even Earthquake in that interview ends up talking about why he had to start his own comedy club and all this. We got to start our own. We got to start our own. And so I just wanted to. So I wrote down a couple notes here that the start your own argument is fallacious, broadly speaking, because it suggests that we don't need to engage white America or corporate America or the state or political power, because we could just start our own and build like other people have built. But again, as I've argued differently elsewhere, that misses so many of the points. First of all, usually start your own is when people say that they're referring not like a nation or national sovereignty. They're talking about a business. So they leave out the fact that corporations require state approval just legally speaking. Then of course it's the state, broadly speaking, that determines everything about that business or the specific corporation. That is, yes, the state is currently dominated by corporate interests because primarily those corporations understand that it's the state that determines taxes, tariffs, trade agreements, operating standards, zoning, all of those things. So you can't do this. There is no start your own without political power. And then, as I said in my note, start your own is never applied to national sovereignty and is evidence of it being a capitalist myth, in that it masks individualism as collective liberation. So, which is itself a good segue, because this article and this discussion from Christopher Mott, this white paper that he wrote, is about the state's use of woke politics to expand its own already predetermined interests. So Dr. Todd Stephen Burrows sent me something because we saw I don't know if I'm going to get a copyright hit on this or not. So what I am going to do, you know what? I don't know if I want to even risk that. I don't know if I even feel like risking it, but I'm going to. I just want to show you all because you saw, I'm sure many of you have seen the Wakanda Forever teaser. And Dr. Todd Stephen Burrows and I were talking the other day about how, what we're going to say or how we're going to respond to this. And he was already talking about all the YouTubers already crying and falling apart over the trailer of this next Black Panther film. And I was already saying again, I was like, for what? I was if they're sad over Chadwick Boseman, that's one thing. But if you sad over the character of the Black Panther, I'm like, what you crying over the traitor for? Who's crying for Killmonger, the real hero of the film? So Dr. Burrows sends me this here, which is, and I'm going to leave the sound off, but it's a compilation of all these people watching the trailer and crying or having some sort of emotional breakdown. And it's a mashup of this, and it's a well done trailer. The movie looks like it's going to do well at pulling on all the heartstrings and paying tribute to Boseman and all of that, and somehow justifying this isolationist African national fantasy that crushes Pan-Africanism and then turns its tech over to the CIA. But anyway, I just thought it was funny to see like all these people having these reactions. Some of them start crying and like really boo-hooing and having like they're completely falling apart. And I'm saying, man, this is, I mean, and they got Angela Bassett giving a speech about what her family has had to sacrifice, and anyway, so I bring that up because now to finally just to get to the, so I saw the link to the Gray Zone interview with Max Blumenthal and Christopher Mott, the author of this piece here, is in the show description. So please do check it out. And then also because I mean, obviously your interpretation might be different or even better than my own. And I'm not going to go over it word for word, and I'm not going to necessarily, get everything right. So obviously I invite you all to check it out. But so this is the link here to the overview, the Woke Imperium, the coming confluence between social justice and neoconservatism. And he outlines the key findings here, and then you can download the PDF, which I'm going to pull up my copy now, because that's where all my notes are, and it has the entire piece to it. And the piece is really, it's I think very well done, and easily made relevant to the conversations we have here, and to the conversation specifically we're going to have in a little bit around Assata Taught Me. And I would like to also say that what Mott says here does a lot, I think, to help me clarify my own thoughts about what I've been trying to say are the use of people's struggles, whether it be the LGBTQ community, the so-called multiracial community, or any other community that sees its specific interests or identities taken up by the mainstream. It's not that those issues aren't legitimate and those struggles aren't legitimate, but there is a difference between the legitimacy of those struggles and their neoconservativization and their abuse in the public sphere. And that little bit of nuance, I think, is being lost in some of the conversations that are having in the Pan-African community. And I'll just stop there, and probably beyond that, but that's really my main concern. And then even as I noted here, even going back to my own early issues with the anti-soda reverse hashtag community, I saw there and others' critiques of Hoteps and Pan-Africanism as critiques of bastardized forms which function themselves to create the backlash against which they claim to represent. So in other words, what Mott ends up talking about here that we're going to go through is, and I think, or I'm going to paraphrase, is a welcomed, created backlash against the politics that the state ends up claiming that it represents, or that the mainstream claims that they're representing, because they bastardize the form. It's similar to my own criticism, going back to the point I was making about Dr. Ransby and the support for Bernie Sanders. My argument was that a support for Bernie Sanders in the context of the Democratic Party, a support for socialism in the context of the Democratic Party as it's currently formed, is support for a bastardized form that's going to boomerang back negatively to work against those of us who actually want those politics. The same thing around why are we it's another thing, why are we supporting Obama and his promises around the Employee Free Choice Act in 2007 and 2008 and universal health care, when we know he's not going to argue for those, and our support for his ostensible claims to support those politics are going to work against them ever coming to be. In part because the backlash created from the bastardized form that deserves resistance is going to inhibit people from adopting and accepting the legitimate form that people like we in these spaces are arguing for. All right. So as Mott writes here, the primacist interventionist wing of the United States foreign policy establishment, as he calls the blob, has a long history of using prevailing moralist trends to serve as ideological justifications for expansionist and hawkish policies. The newest iteration of this process is the adoption of social justice causes and rhetoric as the explicit goals of the United States foreign policy. So when and by the way, when Mott talks about foreign policy, I would want to remind that from my own, and I think several of our, more than just, but maybe our own, but my own perspective, that foreign policy is directed internally towards its internally colonized held populations like Black people, etc. The domestic form, again, the sort of the reverse of what Malcolm said about the police doing locally what the military does internationally. So when Mott talks about foreign policy, I always end up reading that as policy that is going to be directed in another form at Black people here, in colonized people here in the United States. Mott continues, rather than a coordinated conspiracy directed from a central organization or even a conscious desire on the part of the participants, however, this process of adopting, incorporating, and cultivating new rationales to sustain what is an idealist and internationalist strategic culture in the United States has become routinized. It is routine. The entrenchment of systemic moralism in the American national security apparatus has been facilitated and is at least partly driven by a highly competitive professional class vying to secure their position in the system by using virtue signaling to demonstrate class solidarity to their higher ranks. Woo! I had to put that in green because I wanted to highlight it to stand out in green. Because as I think about my own colleagues in my own profession, I just hear, this is people going after that. That all of this is partly driven by a highly competitive professional class vying to secure their position in the system by using virtue signaling to demonstrate class solidarity to their higher ranks. So as I interpret this, I am going to talk about Black liberation. I am going to talk about LGBTQ struggles and the struggles of women and the struggles of the poor and the struggles of the immigrant. But I'm going to do it safely within the confines of what demonstrate a class solidarity to those who create the problem in the first place. Because that's the goal. I'm trying to, people who are in that space are trying to get in. He calls it normative mimicry. This mimetic mechanism incentivizes pushing the envelope and chasing trending causes. Remember, I've been saying these are just bars for me. Because remember, I've been saying since the pandemic, easily, I've been saying that we live in a moment of unlike any other in our history, in human history, where all of the issues plaguing humanity can be brought to the surface for conversation, for investigation, for discussion, for filmmaking, for book writing, but almost all of it is done in a very carefully narrow and limiting, even reactionary way that makes sure that the conclusions reached do not threaten the very structures that create those problems in the first place. It's a very slick. So this piece here, I think, is just bars, as they say, as you young folks say. The current wokiest incarnation of American globalist evangelism seeks not only to change the governments of other nations, but engineer their very cultures according to the Western progressive model. So abroad, internationally, domestically, whatever, the goal is, hey, American global evangelism is the answer. And you're going to reframe, you're going to organize your own cultural position in accordance to Western progressivism. And that's why Mott describes this as a woke imperium of moralistic cosmopolitanism, an imperialism of wokeness that is going to come again. That's why we saw the dashikis and the African scarves and the fists and all they're going to come. JP Morgan, remember my favorite picture, him on his knee in front of his Jamie Dimon, that is, in front of his JP Morgan vault with his fist up. I'll show you the fist, but you ain't getting none of this money. So Mott summarize again. So as he says, the new woke face of American hegemony and projects of empire is designed to project the U.S. as an international moral police rather than a conventional great power, and the result is neo-imperialism with a moral face. So that's why we even hear people coming from within the United States, within Black and brown and other oppressed communities, coming back with, yes, it's messed up for us here, but this is the best country in the world. This is the place where it can happen. This is, and ever increasingly, their responses are seen going towards the right, as Mott will talk about. That's why we're seeing more people, Kanye, Ice Cube, whoever, going toward the right, encouraged farther to the right to get their answers to their problems or our problems. And of course, this has provided the latest ideological justification for interventionism, and it has become readily adopted by the U.S. foreign policy establishment. Again, I think I put the link already in the show description. One of the early live streams when we started, I think maybe slightly before BPM officially got started. One of the first ones I did was about Anthony Blinken coming into Biden's cabinet, and how Blinken was already at that time talking about how, as a Jew, he understood what happens when the world is left unattended and the rise of fascism can occur and the world can go much worse. And he was saying, this is why, as Secretary of State, I'm going to want to expand U.S. influence around the world, because we bring the democracy, we bring the liberation, we bring the progressivism. And that's why, as Mott says here, this is the liberal Atlanticist wing, or as my man, the late John Judge, used to talk about, the liberal wing of the ruling elite. The wing that saw the Bush wing of the ruling elite seek to attack the Reagan wing of the ruling elite. They don't like each other. They're just fighting over who's going to rule over the rest of us. So he goes through some of this history, does Mott, and I think it's great. It's very important. It's worth a review for some of us. So when he talks about Thomas Jefferson and his belief in an exemplar empire of liberty that would shine forth like a beacon to the other benighted nations of the world, this old idea that the United States was going to use its slavery and imperialism as somehow rebranded a form of enlightenment. The United States form of colonization to be different from other powers. This was always part of the argument. We're not like the French. We're not like, with the presidency of Woodrow Wilson, this cultural trend or civil religion was incorporated into policymaking. Wilson saw the First World War as an opportunity for spreading American political values and a universal framework for understanding interstate affairs once the United States became embroiled in the conflict that is World War I. So, don't need to belabor the point. I don't even remember all the details about how bad Wilson was, his support for D.W. Griffith's Birth of a Nation, his support for the white supremacy and colonization of the planet, all of that kind of stuff. But from his perspective, it was a civil religion that he was imposing on the world. The United States also failed to extend the principle of self-determination to colonize people outside of Europe. Again, so even after the Second World War, just talking about, again, the careful confines within which freedom and democracy were being considered for Europe only, for Western Europe only, not anybody else. Even going back, I keep mentioning one of my favorite books by Patricia Bradley, the slave propaganda and slavery, where those white folks like Sam Adams, who's famously, remembered as a beer, would talk openly about freeing the slaves from the bondage of the enslaver, but only in the context of themselves as the slaves and the British as the enslaver. The Africans, that wasn't. No, we're not talking about that. We're not talking about that. However, this more successful turn at internationalism depended more on an almost absolute authority enjoyed by the victors of the Second World War than an idealist model of cosmopolitanism. The United States was now the world's sole superpower. This development raised immediate questions as to how this unprecedented position of power and influence should be utilized. The Clinton administration, the first to have its tenure entirely overlap with the new unipolar world order, was rife with internal disagreements about embracing humanitarian intervention. The issue was finally decided during the collapse of Yugoslavia, where, again, I was even on board the John F. Kennedy when we were sent to drop pamphlets over then Yugoslavia. And I remember asking what's on the pamphlets, and I was told you don't have clearance for that. Just push the crate. I was like, okay, that's deep. Utopian project to pacify global. Again, part of what they're talking about here after what Mott is talking about here after 9/11, and the Bush administration pivoting from the specific mission of hunting down Al-Qaeda to its allies to declare a global war on terror, embarking on a utopian project to pacify global flashpoints through nation building, beginning in Afghanistan, which we see after 20 years how well that went. With the collapse of Bush-era's evangelism and the coming of the Obama administration's professed realist outlook, Americans voted to reject messianic thinking and regime change policies as the proper response to 21st century threats. Rather than abandoning the utopian policies of the past, however, the new government simply shifted the rationale for such policies yet again. In the wake of the Arab Spring protests, the United States and its allies proceeded to launch military operations in Libya and Syria under the pretext of humanitarian interventionism. Responsibility to Protect, or R2P, the brainchild of Samantha Power, whose inclusion in the Obama administration coincided with the shift away from the realism promised by Barack Obama to the more conventional approach characterizing U.S. policy in the unipolar era. So again, draped in this humanitarianism, draped in this, we're not coming with the messianic vision of Christian imperialists as was more seen under Bush. Obama comes with, hey, nah, man, hey, dude, hey, hey, I'm one with everybody and I'm cool, we're just gonna, and then as soon as there's Arab Spring, here comes Obama's bombs in overthrows in Libya and Syria. And then, of course, as Mott points out, in Libya in particular, it ruined the country. The post 9/11 patriotic jingoism and the Allied, by the way, this is going to be very helpful in the second edition of my Buying Power book, because in that section where I'm trying to summarize some of this and talk about the post Second World War era of U.S. being the singular hegemon in the world and using its, or rebranding its imperialism home and abroad. This is exactly what I'm talking. This adds so much depth to it. So again, I encourage people, I'm skimming and kind of running through it, but I encourage people to, really, check this out on their own for the full, whatever, Anyway, the post 9/11 patriotic jingoism and the Allied desire to force economic integration of rogue countries, fueled in part by messianism, was gradually replaced with a liberal cosmopolitan concern for the rights of the people trapped in conflict zones. Effectively, these ideologies proved to be highly compatible with the interventionism while creating new fertile grounds of instability, primed for more intervention pushed by a mainstream media that functioned to uncritically boost such narratives, especially in regard to the rise of the Syrian civil war. I love that. We're going to impose this liberal cosmopolitanism. It's going to create more problems, which are going to invite more interventionism. And we get to keep on, the vicious cycle. We get to continue on and on and on. So in this, the cultural shift in U.S. national security strategy. These growing associations quickly matured into a mainstream coalition after the unexpected victory of Donald Trump, leading to new think tanks bringing together formerly Republican commentators with the leadership of Democratic Party. Bill Kristol, the neoconservative partisan once loathed by Democrats in the Bush era as the primary propagandist for the prosecution of the Iraq War, even got his own one-off segment on Democrat-leaning MSNBC as Woke Bill Kristol. So we all saw this. Once Trump got elected, all of these conservatives, you had Bush operatives being given shows on MSNBC, and you know, that whole wing was now seen as the responsible conservative community. And it allowed for, and this is again sort of the point I was making earlier about Bernie Sanders and the Democratic Party writ large. They were happy to have, and even to this, even recently, you have Nancy Pelosi saying we need the responsible Republicans back. They want that. They need that WWE styled fake wrestling battle, an opponent to give themselves legitimacy, so that we never get anywhere. Such trends also underlie the increasing usage of social justice buzzwords to describe nations that are cast as rivals to the U.S. to foment increased hostility toward them among American media consumers. For example, the 2021 protests in Cuba were described by the left wing by the left wing, but generally pro-U.S. North American Congress in Latin America as primarily a reaction against the Cuban government's tolerance for anti-Black racism. Remember when they did that, and we called them out on this platform and elsewhere? The U.S. media was trying to rebrand protests in Cuba, and they've done that before. There was that dust up, was it a decade ago, when there were all these left, Cornel West signed it, all these left academics that signed this condemnation of Fidel Castro and the Cuban Revolution because of their persistent racism. And we're not seeing how they were themselves being played upon by the state and the very right-wing conservative agenda that would encourage people to be critical of the Cuban Revolution based on ongoing persistent racism, as opposed to what's going on here, for instance, or anywhere else. And then a more direct side of this rhetoric being used was when a far right-wing and U.S.-backed government that came to power through a coup in Bolivia under Janine Áñez was often referred to approvingly in English language media as being headed by a woman activist. So what Mott does here is, I think, brilliantly outline the way the state here and its media apparatus here in the United States uses struggles within the United States to project itself as supportive of those movements when imposing its foreign policy overseas. Oh, Cuba, we support your anti-Black protests, which they weren't. Your anti-racism or anti-Black racism protests, which they weren't. Oh, we support this woman activist. We're not going to damn sure not going to let Hillary get elected. We're not even going to elect a neocon, imperialist, warmongering, racist woman as president, but we're going to praise the one we impose on you as a women's activist. I mean, that is. However, with the fall of Kabul in August of 2021, Afghan women and girls suddenly became the primary topic of discussion once again. Same thing there. The framing of international policy in terms of domestic issues. I don't know why I put that note there, but in keeping with a general strategy of framing their Afghan coverage in terms of domestic social issues and topical causes in America, Western journalists even highlighted the covering up of a George Floyd mural in Kabul by the Taliban as a particular example of backsliding in the global march of liberalism brought on by America's withdrawal from that country. Right. So they were even saying, look at how the Taliban terrorists covered up a George Floyd mural. We killed George Floyd, but they covered up his mural, so they're worse than us. Influential UK professor Mary Kaldor, long an advocate for liberal interventionism, wrote about how the war on terror might have been a failure, but humanitarian intervention could take its place as a guiding mission for the US and its allies. We're not going to come in under the in a war of terror, a war on terror. No. We're humanitarily intervening. That bullet, that drone that blew up your wedding, that was humanitarian intervention. That wasn't a war on terror. When we kicked in your door and shot your family, that was humanitarian intervention. When we dragged you off to a black site, humanitarian intervention. Bringing the conflict's commentary full circle, the rhetorical tactics most often employed at the end of the U.S. involvement in Afghanistan serve as an exaggerated form of the moralist posturing signaled earlier in the war. After all, intelligence agencies in the first decade of the war had decided to use human rights and feminism rather explicitly to justify the shift in U.S. policy toward nation building in Afghanistan to the people of allied European countries. After all, intelligence agencies in the first decade of the war had decided to use human rights and feminism rather explicitly to justify the shift in U.S. policy toward nation building in Afghanistan. Because now we're not, warring on terror. We're bringing in human rights and feminism. Fundamentally, this latest iteration of liberal interventionist ideology centered on co-opting activism and progressive causes to advance U.S. global primacy is not so much of a break with the past as it might at first appear, especially considering the long entrenched nexus between academia, defense contracting, and government agencies. Uh-oh. In fact, the first draft of President Eisenhower's famous speech on the dangers of the military-industrial complex originally included a reference to academia as an important driver of that oligarchic relationship. The university would play... the draft was also prescient in recognizing the role ideas germinating in the university would play in providing convenient and useful rationales for advancing globalism and future projects of empire in the name of liberation.
Message.
Elite overproduction has increased the pool of humanities graduates beyond society's ability to employ them. It therefore becomes necessary for the class of applicants to demonstrate their ability to work within the language, not just of academia generally, but also of the obscurantist jargon so prevalent within postmodernist schools of philosophy. Yeesh. American intelligence agencies, which once had a role in influencing a formerly class-based left opposition and molding it into one of safely middle-class cultural revolution, find this process quite natural. American intelligence agencies, which once had a role in influencing a formerly class-based left opposition and molding it into one of safely middle-class cultural revolution, find this process quite natural. Yeesh. The end result is one of performative radicalism and activism, where desire to reform policy at home can be safely integrated into the structures of government and redirected abroad. The danger posed by truly radical and dissenting domestic voices can therefore be weakened in the domestic sphere and redirected to support military expansionism abroad. Given elite overproduction and the highly competitive nature of selection within these institutions, these trends are only exacerbated by the virtue signaling that is needed to appear cutting edge and woke, hence the championing of ever more niche and avant-garde causes.
Message.
So again, I have made, obviously not this well said, but I have been making this point just on this platform alone over the last year, over and over again. For instance, and I'll say it this way, I don't think, with all due respect to our elder dear brother Dr. Sundiata, I don't think it's a shock. I don't think it's surprising, I should say, that I'm the only full-time academic full-time participant on BPM. Having already secured my position in the margins, I don't think it's a shock, and I don't think it's a surprise. Now, I'm not, this is not to say that everybody who isn't is an intelligence asset. What I'm saying is that there is no incentive within the academy to be more radical than there would be an incentive in any other field or profession. And in fact, quite the opposite. Academia being seen as essential to the function of the state and its production of ideology and framing and interpreting the world. This point that Mott is making, I think, is incredibly important. That is that there is an overproduction. So I mean, I talk about this all the time in terms of jobs and careers and all this. There are so many talented, brilliant academics being produced, not relative to the workforce, but relative to the academic world. I mean, it's still a tiny percentage of the overall workforce. But there's so many being produced with so much talent and skill who are not either interested in politically or willing to raise questions or politics or ideas that are unwelcomed. So for whatever I might see as my value or my strength academically or otherwise, or the value of others in the field, I am easily replaced. So again, I'm very clear. I have not produced academically at the level of many others, including many who are much younger than I am. So I understand why just objectively people who are hiring would say, I would want this person instead of him. They've produced this much more. They have more prestige level presses they're publishing on. They don't raise certain questions or arguments. But at the same time, I recognize, for instance, how good I am in the classroom, how good I am, so for instance, I recognize, anyway, my point is I'm not falsely humble or I don't have a low self-esteem. I'm just more or less objective in assessing my own position here. But my point is that I don't think a lot of people can do what I do in the classroom. I don't think a lot of people can do what I do in terms of distilling forms of information and bringing, I think I have a lot to offer, but I'm easily replaced. There is an overproduction of wildly capable, talented people who can do what is needed from the perspective of the institution in the classroom just as well, without bringing all that I or people like me would bring that could be seen as problematic. So, and this is the point. And I think so. What Mott is saying here is extremely important, and it may be overt. There are instances where there's an overt. I've shared some of my own experiences. There are obviously many others of you will be this way or you will suffer. But most of it, as I think, happens, as Mott is saying here, that given elite overproduction and the highly competitive nature of selection within these institutions, these trends are only exacerbated by the virtue signaling that is needed to appear cutting edge and woke, hence the championing of ever more niche and avant-garde causes. So you'll see people invited into the academic world who will raise every issue. And then you can, as the more you pay attention, you can start, and particularly if you have a certain political orientation, you'll see, oh, wow, they're starting off with a very justifiable, righteous anger and cause, and they're like slowly walking me back to the Democratic Party, to summarize it. It's like, wait a minute. Oh man, so this all just is such bars to me. Anyway, continuing, the possibility that the United States could one day tout its efforts at diversity, equity, and inclusion as evidence of its suitability to restructure other societies through occupation, training missions, or logistical support cannot be discounted. And again, I apply this when I'm looking at the conditions of Black people internally to the United States. Latin Americans, indigenous people, etc. Even the working class could be isolated and seen, as a variable in this way. You don't need political power. You don't need struggle. You need a few more LGBTQ people in office and on TV. You need a few more Black people in office and on TV. You need a few more references to working people on TV, and maybe a working class character on a show. And we're going to help you with logistical support, job training, business training, and what's the word I'm looking for? Maybe even a little business investment, a little venture capital. We'll invest in some small businesses. Just chill. Currently, certain identitarian signaling within the Army and the Navy has already shown how impactful presently fashionable ideologies like critical race theory have become within U.S. bureaucracy. Same thing there. Mark Milley, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff General, Mark Milley, gave a pointed defense of using niche academic theories like CRT in the education of military officers, stating that I want to understand white rage and I'm white, and denied accusations that such a focus would undermine the functionality of the military. So it's not that obviously he wants to change the ideology or the purpose of the military. He just wants to understand how to manipulate critics of anti-Black racism. He wants to mollify them. He wants to make it appear as though the military is a safe place for the diverse array of poor people who will be dragged into it and used as cannon fodder in increasing, in continuing imperial warfare in perpetuity. Is he really deeply engaging critical race theory and reading the work of Derek Bell and inviting blah, 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 blah? I mean, what would what then would the purpose of, anyway. The adoption of progressive speech patterns by the establishment serves to fracture and effectively silence internal dissent against hawkish policies, such as sanctioning or launching military operations against the illiberal country in question. So this is exactly this is, again, better than I could say it, what Mott is summarizing here. Why the military would be doing this. Why any structure of imperial power would be wanting to do this. Adopt progressive patterns of speech to fracture and effectively silence internal dissent. Oh, this part again.
Message.
To make it harder to stand against hawkish policies such as sanctioning or launching military operations against the illiberal country in question. Think of how that works out internally within Black politics. I want reparations. I want Black freedom and liberation. I want Black businesses to thrive. So how can you not defend me against these illiberal critics of my work? Jared and his ilk are illiberal and deserve sanctioning and the launching of intellectual assaults and strikes against them, because I'm representing your causes. I mean, again, personally, I can't help, Aaron Mate could say, Jared, I don't need to hear your criticism of Peniel Joseph, because Gerald Horne signed off on him. Robin Kelly signed off on him. So, Jared, you are the illiberal in this context, deserving of criticism, because how could I be criticism? I'm supporting a discussion of Black liberation and struggle by talking to Peniel and his book about Kwame Ture. I have a note in here later on again about this is like an intellectual, the updating of the intellectual Mantan Manifesto. Black or white authors writing about Black struggle, covering Black struggle, can say, hey, I'm covering it. I'm talking to Black people. I'm discussing these Black revolutionaries. How could you have a criticism of it? In this light, Mott continues, the problem with speeches such as the one given by the U.S. representative of the United Nations, Linda Thomas Greenfield, in the General Assembly, is that by seeking to leverage the New York Times' 1619 Project within the context of a foreign policy address, she universalizes the American historical experience as posited in that report and transforms it into an absolute moralistic position from which to interpret global trends. Woof. So whatever I or we may think of the 1619 Project, it is being used by Lisa Thomas Greenfield. Again, go back and check out the video. I put it in the show description. One of the first ones I was doing about Blinken. I mentioned Lisa Thomas Greenfield. I was making the same point, not as well, but this is the same. This is why this is all bars to me. It doesn't matter to me as much about what we think of the 1619 Project. The same thing, my point about propaganda. I'm less interested in whether we think the propaganda was effective on us or effective here or effective there. I'm more interested that we're clear on the intent behind the propaganda in the first place. So in this context, Thomas Greenfield, I'm less interested in whether I think the 1619 Project is this or that. I'm more interested in how Thomas Greenfield is now using it, and the state is now using it, and the New York Times is using it, and the established order is using the argument to project itself as addressing these issues, which allows cover for furthering the policies that create the problems in the first place. Washington and Beijing, where both sides accuse each other of hypocrisy and human rights. Okay, that was oh wow. The pivot towards these themes as the new way to single out rival states also came up with the acrimonious Alaska summit between Washington and Beijing, where both sides accuse each other of hypocrisy and human rights, coupled with the North Atlantic Treaty Organization hosting workshops on exploring gender and hybrid threats. Wow. All of this is part of a new method of delegitimizing foreign states in the eyes of Western media consumers. I would argue the same thing here. If you are a critic of mainstream liberal activists, media, Black politicians, journalists, etc., we are deemed as illegitimate in the eyes of the establishment that supports their approach to addressing the cause, the outcomes of the state's actual policies. If you're going to talk about race, if you're going to talk about the history of Black struggle, if you're going to talk about Black liberation, if you're going to talk about and even reference the Black Panther Party, there's got to be a certain frame. Mott continues, a media market for such commentaries already clearly exists, with the generally pro-interventionist The Atlantic running an article in May 2022 advocating for the decolonization of Russia by painting the multi-ethnic history of that state as identical to Victorian colonialism and thus in need of dismantling via regime change. Liberal Imperium has clear interests in making U.S. foreign policy appear woke while casting unfriendly nations as illiberal and anti-woke. Foreign rivals opposed to these policies can be painted as being on the wrong side of history, against progress, diabolical, and so on. For an explanation, it is necessary to look at how the prevailing structure of material and professional incentives shapes and exploits the cultural mores of the policy-making class, the class that then proliferates those same mores or mores. The prevailing structure of material and professional incentives shapes and exploits. Dating back to the Central Intelligence Agency's financial support for the modern artists of the early Cold War to push liberal values associated with American exceptionalism, that's Saunders' work, Francis Stone Saunders and others. The ruling class has been attuned to exploiting the prevailing cultural winds in the West to advance their foreign policy and security interests disguised as American national interests. And again, for my own purposes, in ours, I would argue that that same foreign policy thrust and security interest thrust was directed and is directed at us internally. In practice, state-backed institutions have used carrots and sticks of grant-making and professional advancement and development to secure systemic groupthink among the bureaucracy, foster ideological hegemony around liberal internationalism, and to manufacture consent around permanent U.S. global primacy. And networks of elite recruitment and promotion are foundational, both to reinforce institutional prestige and to cultivate and catalyze a culture of strategic consensus enhanced and propagated by a highly visible and media-savvy army of activists and advocacy groups. Woo! Again, bar.
Message!
And I wrote in my notes that soda and the anti-soda reverse backwards hashtag, that this is meant to be in response. Black capitalism, cryptocurrency, Assata Taught Me all benefit similarly. I wrote, as a question, in other words, are these, as I'm seeing them, preferred approaches to Black struggle benefit from this array or arrangement that Mott is describing here? And I think yes. I think that there is clearly in the reverse hashtag and the Black capitalist and the cryptocurrency nonsense. And I think even in the Assata Taught Me argument, there is this, again, we're critical of what's happening here, but in the context of making sure the United States improves and maintains its global primacy, and the arguments around these issues that I've outlined, that I've highlighted or just noted here, are to all be carefully cultivated to catalyze a culture of strategic consensus, and it is all enhanced and propagated by a highly visible and media-savvy army of activists and advocacy groups. So Mott obviously is talking about international foreign policy, but I think when it's directed, these same things are happening directed internally at us. This complex has routinized a positive feedback loop reinforcing conformity. New generations of professional class enter public service. The media organizations that are responsible for the majority of foreign policy coverage are also overwhelmingly represented by those from the highest echelon of the university system, hence joining the complex out of the class solidarity as much as from ideological conviction. Conceptualizing policy inducing, this is really deep. The academy does this, definitely does this. There is even an unintentional lore or there's a lore that is intended that some accept unintentionally, and then hence join the complex out of class solidarity as much from ideological conviction. They want to be in that class if they're not already in it. They aspire to a class position. So even if they don't fully agree ideologically, they're like, but I want that class position, so I'm just going to let it ride. Conceptualizing policy, including foreign policy, through the lens of social justice is now the mainstream position of the university credentialed class, who make up the majority of the government, media, and corporate middle management. Just as the largely performative use of LGBT, or Black Lives Matter symbols by investment banks and arms manufacturers does not indicate a sacrifice of their respective bottom lines, so too can Langley and Foggy Bottom publicly signal their commitment to all current forms of social progressivism without deviating from their imperial ambitions and universalist missions. And just in case anybody's not familiar, Foggy Bottom is the metro stop and the location, as is Langley in Virginia, where you get the Pentagon and the CIA and all of that apparatus, the blobs, as he described earlier. So you can satisfy universalist missions and imperial ambitions by publicly signaling a commitment to all current forms of social progressive, whatever is hot, you can, French sociologist Pierre Bourdieu called the resource cultural capital. He's also, I read his book where he talked about the spectacle of media too. Interesting stuff there from Bourdieu. Maybe an exception to our general stance against France. Anyway, the French sociologist Pierre Bourdieu called this resource cultural capital, which he defined as familiarity with the legitimate culture within a society. I made a note here from my work, because I think Professors Halliday and Nembhard, their work falls into this as they talk about market power and consumer power and symbolic power. They're more talking about cultural capital that Bourdieu is looking at, I think appropriately critically, but I think Halliday and Nembhard look at it more as a positive. And again, where we just humbly disagree. Anyway, Mott continues. The point is not that certain progressive ideals cannot also be held as sincere beliefs by those who espouse them. It is more so that the functional significance of these beliefs rests not upon the intensity of those ideological commitments on the part of the adherents, but rather upon the role they play in consolidating and perpetuating the hegemonic prestige of the institutions of governments and the class that staffs them. So again, it's not that people don't have certain progressive ideals and are sincere about them. It's more so that the functional significance of these beliefs rests not upon the intensity of those ideological commitments on the part of the adherents. So it doesn't matter how much they believe it. And perpetuating already existing power. The purpose, however, is to maintain continuity in foreign policy establishment as it enters a new cultural environment. And again, I'm saying foreign policy, it's in terms from perspective of power, it's important that they maintain continuity in their foreign policy as it relates to us internally, to use the very cultural shifts to resist a fundamental paradigm shift in the U.S. in U.S. international posture, while protecting the status quo for the establishment and safeguarding its underlying strategic assumptions. Again, my point about intent versus impact. We have to recognize when our intent to raise certain issues or causes is being misused to impact society in a way that prevents change. And I think too often, even those who are not consciously making a decision to sell out or be treacherous or to go for the bag or whatever, I think too often we are induced by invitation, by praise, by paychecks, to see our legitimately sincere efforts as being correct and legitimate, as opposed to being welcomed and rewarded because they don't threaten anything. So as he says here, that in terms of the Right to Protect project, it legitimizes any form of military and diplomatic action that is nominally undertaken in its service while delegitimizing criticism of such policies. The new wokeist coming of the empire, however, is arguably even more destabilizing as it seeks not merely political restructuring in targeted countries, but total cultural submission, which could in time further radicalize the countries in the global south against not just America, but liberalism and progressivism as such. Here is why, again, I've said it's the International Mantan Manifesto. Here's why, again, as much as a materialist as I may be, I have to respect the arguments of the African-centered world who continue to promote a reminder of what African culture is as opposed to European culture, what indigenous culture is as opposed to Western culture, and so on and so forth, and saying we cannot lose sight of all of that, even as maybe it needs to be updated for the contemporary world, so to speak. Because again, I'm looking at this internally as well, that in terms of the Mantan Manifesto, you know, the idea that those in power are going to put black faces in front. They're going to put black people even in African clothing or with symbols of African radicalness and black radicalness. They're going to put them in front. They're going to invite them to the stage. But all to, as I've been arguing, redefine buying power or black capitalism as black liberation, or redefine investment as black liberation, or redefine getting a Democratic Party candidate over the line as somehow political power, or buying power as financial independence and strength. You know, all of this is rebranding. It is a new version of what Nixon and them were trying to do with black capitalism being the new form of black power. So as we wrap up with Mott, the processes described above are historically speaking neither new or unique to the United States. The advocates of a more realist and restrained foreign policy in the North Atlantic, and especially the United States, must realize that a rhetorical shift towards social justice and human rights represents only the latest iteration of a universalism already predominant in most U.S. institutions, the fated ideological evolution for those in favor of expanded military and sanctions policies. This will be accomplished by redirecting, enlarging, and universalizing U.S. domestic politics within the extant machinery of U.S. national security and Western alliances to NATO. And that's why I had to note why we see resurgence of black capitalism. Because this argument, microcosmed for us, is saying that, yeah, at the end of the day, we're gonna promote critics of anti-black racism that are more realistic. They're going to talk about racial capitalism maybe as opposed to colonialism because it sounds better. Or they're going to talk about black liberation only in the context of a hashtag Black Lives Matter movement. Or they're going to redefine leadership as nonprofit, democratic supporting neoliberalists. I mean, it's all to make sure that U.S. domestic politics and the extant machinery of U.S. national security go unthreatened. This move is likely to be championed by a media apparatus and an NGO network committed to the ever-expanding liberal project. Mott then brings this up, and this is sort of the point I've mentioned earlier that that I think is important to bring back up here. He talks about the international backlash against U.S. influence, which he says is part of the unintended mistake by this sort of woke attempt. One can point to the democratizing impulses in U.S. foreign policy during the end of the First World War or after the Cold War as precedent, but the rhetoric of wokeness targets foreign cultures and is not simply seeking to reshape the political and economic system of those distant lands. It seeks to subvert core beliefs that diverge across class lines and vary greatly from culture to culture in order to push normative and cultural homogeneity. So as I noted here, that this is what part of how I see the Pan-African backlash against LGBTQ plus as a result of feeling it forced upon them, as is the intent. And that's sort of the point I'm making in that argument. That's the point I was trying to make. Yeah, there's an attempt to promote LGBTQ people's stories. Of course, there's a new attempt to promote those identities, sexualities, those issues, those stories, of course, because they want to appear as supporting those struggles, while I think intending to create fracture, as Mott said earlier, within these communities and struggles, to create disunity, disharmony, and an inappropriate focus away from political power, liberation, actual change. So again, it is not that LGBTQ plus communities don't have legit issues and causes for struggle. And of course, they are part of whatever community they come from. And in this context, of course, they're part of the Pan-African community. And yet, and still, I do see the intentional promotion of those communities with the intent of creating, in this case, an intentional backlash that too many in the Pan-African community are falling for. But in general, we're seeing a backlash from the white world against its own LGBTQ plus communities. And other parts of the world are resisting because in part they see maybe that it's not even so much that it's an issue with these communities, but they see it as part of the U.S. imperial thrust to mask their imperial policies. Of course, they also hate a bunch of gays and trans folks too, obviously. But that's not why the state is encouraging discussion of those communities or those issues. He describes here a culture of eugenics. That's something that I've even talked about before, even written about, that this is the cultural genocide threatened, that this is slow motion genocide defined even by the United Nations. Anyway, either way, it is likely that once its utility ends, woke internationalism too will be replaced and turned by another ideological vehicle, and the cycle will repeat itself unless pragmatists, realists, and prudent statesmen come to recognize and actively resist the underlying logic and utilitarian pull of ideology and idealism as such is in greasing the wheels of U.S. war machine. I would say unless we activists and radicals better organize and impose ourselves on the world. But as of now, such idealism is repeatedly weaponized to create a new and perhaps more pathological version of American exceptionalism, to continue the same unpopular and dangerous policies of the post-Cold War era, but reformed so as to appeal to a new generation. Anyway, I think that's fascinating stuff. Very usable material. And I think it does lead us to this discussion of Donna Murch's work, which I'm going to get into now, which won't take as long. I'm not going to go through reading the whole book as I did with that article, more or less, and I'm just going to share a little bit and then share some of the questions I had, and then I'll come and look into the chat. So if there are questions, please feel free to super chat the questions. Please feel free to restate the questions or comments or critiques or whatever, conundrums, catechisms, cacophony, to make sure that I see them. I have not seen any of the chat, and there are, there's like 1,000 messages in there. So I'll come to that in just a minute. But let me just step on over. You know what? Let's do a quick transition and come back and get into the Assata Taught Me right here at I Mix What I Like. I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like. All right, everybody. So this is, I have the book here. Assata Taught Me, praise from, as we could see here, Ibram Kendi, Keeanga Yamada Taylor, Barbara Ransby, Heather Ann Thompson, Robin D.G. Kelly, Adam Getachew, Jason Stanley. So she's got praise from a lot of the left-wing academic names. Assata Taught Me, State Violence, Racial Capitalism, and the Movement for Black Lives by Donna Murch. So let me just pull up the questions I had, and then as is necessary, I can maybe pull up some of the details of the book. So the book is essentially a collection of essays with, I believe, some new material or some updates that Professor Murch wrote while covering I believe from the West Coast, mostly covering the Black Lives Matter movement for Black Lives efforts. So, and I had, and this is where I had really, I had wanted her to come on and to just sort of, tell us about the book, talk about the background and how the essays came to be, and what was her relationship, vis-a-vis, journalistically, academically to that struggle, or maybe as a participant. And one of the first questions, so I had, tell us about the book. And then the next question I had was, how do you see Assata showing up in here? And what was her relationship to this book? And admittedly, because the purpose for that question is that as I read the book more and more, despite the title, despite the cover art, Assata doesn't really show up much in the book. She's referenced in terms of some poetry. She's referenced, obviously as a member of the Black Panther Party and eventually the Black Liberation Army. But there's no real discussion of the party, of her time in it, or it's not like about her. And there's not much about her politics either. There's not much so I even did a word search of the PDF, and there's only 3, I think, mentions of socialism, 3 mentions of communism. There may be a few more if you put in the variation for socialist or communist. So there's not a lot of discussion of that. There's not a lot of discussion of the Panthers or of the Black Liberation Army. By the way, I should have put what I didn't put in the show description, and I will after we wrap up, or people should go and see our discussion with the late Blood McCreary and Sundiata, and Sekou Odinga and Dhoruba bin-Wahad about the history of the Black Liberation Army, and obviously so many more that we have on the channel related to those people and those histories. So I wanted Professor Murch to sort of talk about that a little bit. I maybe was looking for something in terms of how Assata shows up in her book. She obviously saw something different, so I wanted her to maybe lay out what I may not have seen in terms of her reference to or application of Assata. So that was one thing. Another question that I had for Professor Murch is I said that the few times Assata, and this was part of what I referenced in my message to her, the few times Assata is referenced, it is mostly to describe her relationship to movements for Black lives as iconographic or symbolic. So for those like myself who see this as a cause of concern, what do you say? Again, there's not a lot of discussion of Assata, and she's referenced specifically, repeatedly, as and almost exclusively as having her impact in terms of iconography and in terms of symbolically attaching the current struggle to condemnation of racial capitalism and state violence. But what did that mean for Murch and these other activists? I didn't really see much of, and would have wanted to hear more about, maybe in terms of what I missed or didn't see, or just maybe just don't agree with, which is fine too. I don't, we don't have to agree. So I did. Oh man, I keep doing. I really got to get better at this all this time, man. So I wanted to, as I did put in the show notes program, I linked, and I wanted to just share with Professor Murch. I don't know if she'd ever seen it, or if she had responded to it somewhere else, or if she had a response to it here. But for instance, let me stop this. I wanted to share what, this is linked below. So some years ago, when I went to, admittedly, my only visit to see Jalil Muntaqim while he was locked up in Attica, he gave me a letter and specifically asked me to share it, and specifically raised the phrase Assata taught me and was critical of it. So this is, at the time, a political prisoner, member of the Black Liberation Army, the Black Panther Party, a comrade of Assata Shakur, who said that, let's see, he suggested that a point be made about the popularity among younger activists in the Black Lives Matter movement of sweats and tees that say Assata Shakur taught me, and truly infrequent opportunities to actually hear from or engage such teachings directly from the source. Muntaqim is a comrade of Shakur, a former member of the Black Panther Party and Black Liberation Army, and one well situated to offer insight and suggestions to those now engaged in activism. But his point was, I never hear from them. I'm not, and I don't see them moving in the direction that Assata and we were moving in. So he offers up his own suggestions, and at the time specifically said that these movements, and I think maybe to this point they might have actually done some of this, focus more on what would now be said as abolishing the police, debt relief for college students, and stop deportations of dreamers. So again, it wasn't, and at the time, a number of folks got mad at me for sharing this, and I was like, I'm just sharing what Jalil is saying. I don't know why he doesn't have a right to say it. I even put screenshots of the actual letter so nobody could accuse me of poorly transcribing or anything, or misrepresenting anything. And I just added links to what he referenced in that letter, so people could check that out for themselves. But I just wanted to, so I was going to show that to Professor Murch, and then I was going to play this other clip here that I'm going to share with us now, of a previous conversation I had with Dhoruba bin-Wahad, where he references more or less this specific issue. So anyway, I was going to show Professor Murch the letter from Muntaqim and then play this right here.
But political prisoners are in prison because their movement was criminalized. I mean, this is the reason why we have a Black Lives Matter movement that doesn't know jack about political prisoners. They don't even know Sundiata Acoli is Assata Shakur's crime partner or associate. You understand? And they got Assata Taught Me on their T-shirt. They don't even know that. Okay, and when I told folks, for instance, about Al Sharpton and his snitch record and how he went after Assata Shakur, now the sisters were like, he did that? How is it that you're not in touch with your radical history, but the enemy is in touch with their institutional memory? And they knew what worked and what didn't and who it worked on, and you don't even know your radical tradition and where we failed and where we succeeded. So now you're going to reinvent failure, and that's what's happening right now. Because you have a movement that doesn't call itself the Black Liberation Movement, but instead of Black Lives Matter movement, you give oxygen and space to reforming white supremacy. And people could come forward and say, look, it's terrible what America did to you. Yeah, let's tear down a Robert E. Lee statue. Yes, that's right. It was about slavery. Okay, yeah, it was about slavery. Now we remember that we used to whip you. Now we remember we used to rape you. So let's fix it. And how do you fix it? You reform it. And how do you reform it? You talk about, we're going to ban the chokehold. We're going to put more cameras, and they can't cut them off. We're going to have sensitivity training. We're going to get more Black officers on the police force. We're going to do all of that shit that they did.
Well, but to be fair, forgive the interruption again, but to be fair to some of these younger generations and even my own generation, but in particular the younger generations who I would argue are suffering a level of propaganda the world has never seen. They don't have ready access to Dhoruba bin-Wahad and to other political.
What do you mean you talking to me?
I'm talking to
me. They ain't killed me yet.
No. I'm saying, but what I mean by that is not can we find you and reach out to you, but what I really mean by that is the encouragement to do so, because the encouragement comes from mainstream media putting Al Sharpton on TV every night or every week.
That's true.
Or from more well supported, even to the extent other political prisoners like Angela Davis, who are given a lot of. So obviously, I could sit there and get lost in that conversation just watching it again. Dhoruba is always captivating, even when I was a participant looking back at it. But that was really the point I wanted to raise, just to show a clip of a Dhoruba to give Professor Murch a little context and to raise, and then maybe even ask her, because admittedly, I didn't think of this till after that, but I did look through the book again and did another word search just in case I missed it. Because I actually did read the book, but I sometimes read quickly, and I sometimes forget things and don't catch things, and it's always and it was just once. So, but she doesn't mention Sundiata Acoli. She doesn't mention Kamal Siddiqui. She doesn't mention Mumia. She doesn't mention Leonard Peltier. She doesn't mention Mutulu Shakur. She doesn't mention Jalil Muntaqim. She doesn't mention Dhoruba bin-Wahad. She doesn't mention Sekou Odinga. She doesn't mention Blood McCreary. So I think that's I just think it's a legit question, and so even when people read this book, what will Assata be teaching them? And ultimately, I think that the book encourages, so I'll just go through some more of my questions here. So as I have linked in the description below, I said, aren't the arguments of those in the BLM 10 and the like more akin to those of Assata Shakur? So in other words, Donna Murch's book has praise from and praise for Patrisse Cullors, Alicia Garza, Opal Tometi, the names I mentioned at the top of the book, but not even a reference to or discussion of, again, the BLM 10, who could be seen on this platform and obviously elsewhere, describing the political, ideological, behavioral differences between them and the leadership. So, for instance, I thought it was, at one point, Murch she does say something to this was what led me to write that question. In fact, she says something about the Black Lives Matter movement having similar struggles between national leadership and chapters that it was experienced in the Black Panther Party, but she doesn't elaborate. So that was, I thought, really would have been a good time to talk about the BLM 10, and then in that to make that point that there's no reference to the arguments of those chapters at the bottom in this book and what they were saying about the people who I think are intended by the book to be seen as heirs to Assata's struggle. So I wrote here, many of those who praise this book and are praised by this book are seen by a good number of people as anathema to the actual politics of Assata Shakur, and more as misrepresentatives of that struggle than anything else. then so Ibram Kendi, Patrice Cullors, Alicia Garza, and others have that critique. So there was something else I gotta say. I just gotta be honest. There was Professor Murch references a gathering of BLM activists in Chicago that I actually was invited to, convened by Professor Ransby, Kathy Cohen, I think was in the leadership of that as well. And I mean, for real, like Rosa Clemente is really the reason I got invited. It wasn't like they were looking for me. I think Rosa asked them to invite me, something like that. I'm not really sure, but it was, so I don't want to suggest that like I was actually like, I don't feel like legit invited, but I was invited and I appreciate it and I went. It wasn't my thing. Wasn't my jam. I didn't say much. The little bit I raised around electoral politics and sort of that after party idea didn't go well, was not well received. I sort of just stayed quiet. I remember it was my one meeting with Alicia Garza, and she did that thing that she got real close and she said, I just want you to know I see you. I see you. This is like, I appreciate it. But with all the emphasis on that meeting in this book and and more specifically the attendees as being I think I missed the point when I was looking for the book, and I think that's where we just disagree on what form political struggle should take and what it means to reference Assata Shakur. So with all respect to Professor Murch and everybody else, like we just don't agree, and I think that's cool. And I still would have wanted to have the conversation. I would have not wanted it to degenerate into some hostile argument or debate, just as we are able to have in most cases disagreements on this platform that don't go that way. I would have just wanted to, but I would have wanted to hear her response at least to the questions, and then let them be what they were. I mean. If not me, certainly Muntaqim and bin-Wahad have a right to raise their questions about reference to Assata. Anyway, it is what it is. So the next thing I had written here was you situate Assata within M4BL, that is the movement for Black Lives, etc. But what of the criticism of Dhoruba and Muntaqim? What did Assata teach them? So in other words, how does Assata's politics show up? Do you see them showing up? So those of us who might not see them showing up as much or at all, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm being unfair. Maybe I'm not close enough to those movements. All of that could be true. So I wanted to ask her about that. She mentions January 6th. That is, Professor Murch mentions January 6th. And I think I have a disagreement with a lot of people, even someone on this platform on this issue. In terms of how to interpret, let me find exactly what she wrote. Let's see. Okay. Let me just, I'll even share it here. Several political commentators have analogized the violence on January 6th to the end of Reconstruction, in which a violent overthrow of democratically elected state governments took place throughout the South when the federal government pulled out its forces. While the January 6th attack failed as men holding Confederate flags stormed into the Capitol building while erecting a hanging gallows outside, the message was clear. The insurrectionists' primary allegiance was to white supremacy and Trump, not to a multiracial democracy in which the majority of white Christian voters is slowly declining over time. the metastatistic growth of white power, anti-Semitism, and right-wing extremism under the presidency of Donald Trump has revealed the tenuousness of America's democratic institutions. As the United States enters a new phase in the history after the sacking of the Capitol on January 6, 2021, the movement for Black lives has never been more urgently needed to break the bipartisan agreement on punitive anti-crime policies, neoliberal reform, and the upward redistribution of wealth. So again, so I made note of this passage. One, I wanted to ask Professor Murch what she thought of my thoughts of this of January 6th. Again, that I don't like. In other words, is she in agreement with this comparison to the end of Reconstruction? Because I am not. I do not see what happened on January 6th as akin to anything at the levels of what happened in the Reconstruction era, in the reclamation of white supremacy with the withdrawal of the federal government. I don't see it at all as being that. I see it as some misinformed, maybe instigated, angry racists attacking a symbol that they had no intention or ability to take over and control. They had no ability to institute some new form of government that would then itself have control over an apparatus that could be turned against us. In other words, it wasn't plainly, I don't think it was that big a deal. And it wasn't some sign of something new. But then more importantly, I was wanting to ask Professor Murch why she sees M4BL as the formation that most represents the struggle against what she saw happening on January 6th, and how the movement for Black lives is representative of the struggle of Assata Shakur. I don't think they are. On the one hand, I don't mind at all. They're not the enemy. I don't mind that what they're doing exists. I don't mind that some of certainly the groups beneath them are doing what they're doing. I don't disagree or mind. I don't even mind on some level, some symbolic reference to Assata and others, although I'm not really, I think it not a positive. But I don't see it as the having the same politics and design and goals of Assata Shakur and the movement that she was a part of. So I just think that there needs to be clarity around what she was up to and what those are up to now, and where there are similarities and where there are differences, where there's inspiration and yet departure. But mostly I just wanted to hear Professor Murch answer that. So, I mean, but that's just my 2 cents on it. And that would have been my only point on it. Because as I asked where I had laid out in the next question, for that question, I would say M4BL is what is necessary, but Assata was part of a militant Black liberation movement with true leftist internationalist politics. She is a communist. And yet Ransby et al. And those referenced throughout the book talk about racial capitalism. And I'm not entirely sure that I read in racial capitalism what I read when I go back, and as we've done here and we'll do some more of, go back and read the Black Liberation Army Study Guide, for instance, or I just think there are differences. That's all. And as I asked, now I'm blanking on the interview, but as I asked before, why racial capitalism as opposed to colonialism? What is the real difference? Why the linguistic change? Anyway, that's just it. And I did want to raise a question around, because I do think that symbolic or iconographic reference to Assata that doesn't accompany the actual politics, ultimately, as was being said in the previous segment around the Woke Imperium, creates a negative backlash, Because if someone who really desires the politics of Assata looks up and sees them being represented by M4BL, why would the real Assata be any more appealing? See, I don't think in other words, people will often say, but a reference to Assata will lead people to study Assata and then they'll learn for themselves. That's not what happens. There's no historical precedent for that. I don't think there's any historical precedent for that en masse, certainly, ever. The dominant narrative or the dominant image, the prevailing image, sets the frame, sets the tone, sets the standard, sets all the definitional points that are almost impossible to overcome. I always remember years ago when I was teaching at the University of Maryland, closer to the time the movie came out, so not that close, but closer. I had a student reference Malcolm X. She was trying to say Malcolm X, but she said Denzel Washington 3 times and had to be corrected 3 times in a 50-minute class period because her only reference to Malcolm was Denzel Washington. And I've always thought that was the sort of perfect anecdotal example of what happens writ large. So people will I think there will be more likely a permanent attachment to seeing Assata as being represented in M4BL than in the Black Liberation Army, for instance. And I don't think that that's in the same thing I was saying about why I didn't want to support Bernie Sanders. I think that there's more likely to be a backlash against actual socialist revolution if people identify socialism with the weakness and the softness of Bernie Sanders. Why is it should be defined as, along the lines of Che or George Jackson, who's also not mentioned in this book, by the way. But anyway. So then I played. So she also mentions, by the way, Larry Krasner as a progressive DA, saying that a prosecutor that wouldn't have been likely have been elected had it not been for the movement for Black Lives. And I was wanting to ask if she really, what makes him progressive. I honestly only really know about him in relationship to Mumia. So I don't know, maybe he's doing good things otherwise in that state, but I'm not, so I don't know what makes, but again, Mumia is not mentioned in the book, but Larry Krasner is. That's deep. I didn't even think of it that way till just now. Krasner is referenced positively as a progressive offshoot of M4BL, but Mumia isn't referenced at all. So I wanted to ask, are Democratic Party victories positive signs, as she suggests in the book? So, but that's it. Look, I linked to where you can get your copy of Dr. Murch's book. So please do, and let me know. Definitely put a comment below if you think I've gotten any of this wrong or have been unfair. Professor Murch is always welcome to come back on at any time if she would like to correct any of the record. Anyway, if there are any comments or questions that you definitely want my response to, would you all, obviously I'm not necessary in these chats, but please do, redirect my attention if you would. I would have thought so, Samira. I would have thought so, but they don't show up, not even in passing. And I think, the more I went back and we were reading the Woke Imperium, I think some of that is at play here, unintentionally or not. It's there is a style. Like Dr. Burroughs told me years ago after Obama got elected, he had been told by a prominent Black author whose name I don't think I ever was told and wouldn't remember if I was and wouldn't share if I did because I wasn't given permission. But Dr. Burroughs there was a prominent Black writer years ago who had basically been told by publishers that if you want to publish a book at this point about race or Blackness in America, you have to have your book has to conclude with something positive about Obama, like that his presence was now signaling a change or something like that. And I think there's a version of that happening again. That was my argument about Ava DuVernay's 13th documentary. You can talk about incarceration and slavery and all of this, but then you have Newt Gingrich and the Koch brothers as pundits offering their responses to the problem. I mean, like, and you know, there's a prominent sister out there. You still owe me an apology for saying my critique of DuVernay's 13th was because of my patriarchy. You know who you are, and I'm still waiting for that apology. Or at least show me where my essay was wrong on that. That was some foul. Facebook, people get a little foul on Facebook and social media. Accuse me of sexism because I was critical of Ava DuVernay. You better stop it. Not that I'm not without patriarchy, but that wasn't it. Anyway, I like that. That's I like that. An opposite day of Not By Myself. We watched the best. Yeah, I'm assuming that's in reference to the Dhoruba clip. Yep. And didn't she just lose? Didn't she just lose? I'm not all caught up on that. I do want an apology. She dragged me publicly. I mean, that was not fair. That was not fair. I remember that. That was not fair. Because that documentary was a mess. And I was right. And if I was wrong, it wasn't because I was hating on her because she's a woman. That's all I'm saying. That's all I'm saying. Anyway, I appreciate you all coming through. I don't see anything specific. Oh, wait. What's this? Oh, yeah. Sorry. Yeah. What's this? Why does it matter to speak to people you started the show explaining are in place to normalize white supremacy? I'm not saying, well, let me be clear. I was not accusing Professor Murch of being in place to normalize white supremacy. At most, I was saying I see some overlap in the presentation of her argument with what Mott is saying is welcomed in terms of the presentation of criticism of what's happening in this country. But I wasn't really saying that. And as I also mentioned, part of it, I think part of it, you know, has to be, I would have to be fair and say part of it is just personal, that I don't like the idea that I would have a friendly exchange with someone, invite them on the show, and then simply because I in advance shared with them some criticism that they wouldn't come on. I don't, you know, so that's why I talked about it at all. And then I also do think it's fair that, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong here too, but I in general, I think it's fair that if you've written about something I'm interested in, I want to talk to you about it, even if we disagree. I mean, that was my point with Peniel Joseph, and I really disagree. Like, I don't think what Donna Murch did here rises to the level of horror that Joseph did to Touré and Malcolm X. I don't think so. But even then, I wanted to talk to Joseph. I think that's, I don't know, you know, especially maybe more so with community radio than YouTube, but especially with community radio, if I'm addressing myself to a Black audience primarily and to Black audiences that are interested in academic work that addresses itself to Black audiences or themes, then I think it is important that even if I disagree with them, that they be invited on to get a fair sharing their, again, I don't have some dominant platform, but that's just in general what I think about these spaces. We don't have to agree. We don't have to be friends. But I think if you're doing public work and I'm doing public work around the same or similar topic or themes, and there's disagreement, why shouldn't it be hashed out? Ultimately, if we're all in the same or supposed to be in the same struggle, why shouldn't it be able to be hashed out without disagreement, or without principled disagreement? Or, you know, why shouldn't we? Like, why, you know, you know, maybe sometimes I've been a little bit too jokey. So I get it. That's why I'm not too mad, even when Promo and others put me in memes and stuff like that. Okay, all right, maybe, but I don't think that in general that's the direction we should go in. And that wasn't how I approached Professor Murch. So I don't think, you know. Maybe you could, you could argue that okay, but okay. Exactly. This is sort of my approach. That was it. Because I've also, so by the way, I've also suffered the reverse. I've had people sort of fish me onto their platform with emails of praise for my work, and you're so important, and we just are happy to talk with you. And as soon as I've gotten there, they bash me with not even just disagreement about my work, but personal stuff. You know, like I've suffered that, and I don't like that. I don't think that's, you know, if you want to get at me, let me know. I'll show up. I'm more likely to show up and stay. If you say straight up, you want to, not violence, but if you straight up want to do something like you say, Jared, come outside, I'm here. I'm way more likely to do that and stick around to give you what you want than if you fake your way to have me show up and then ambush me, where I'm much more likely to just get mad and leave. So if you really want the exchange, or you really want to show the insufficiency of my ideas, just invite me on. And as I said at the beginning, I am like, and maybe it is because of my, more marginal position. I am honored when people say, I want to talk to you, Jared, about your work, your ideas, even where we disagree. I'm honored by it. I've gone everywhere. I don't think I've ever turned down an invitation to go anywhere. So, but you know what I mean? You know, it's all good. She don't have to deal with me. It's all good. I think that I just hope that I hope elsewhere these ideas and discussions are taking place. Oh, which question? I don't know. I missed that. I think I'm missing something here. I am, brother. She fits with my to say. Okay. Right on. It's at imixwhatilike.org. I can add it to the show notes here. But I was just essentially saying that the 13th presents. I was essentially saying what in a different way what I think Mott says quite well, that the 13th documentary presents issues a lot of people are focused on and wanting radical or revolutionary change about in a very liberal way. And I said that the 13th ended up being a commercial for Hillary Clinton in her campaign against Donald Trump. It was advocating that the Democratic Party and the liberal establishment of the ruling elite had an answer to the problem of mass incarceration. And I'm like, nah, they don't. They benefit from it. And one of my favorite points was that even DuVernay herself was forced at that time to come out and say that her documentary was not meant to be an ad in favor of Hillary Clinton, because the Clinton campaign used it as such. And I was like, don't get mad at them for doing that when it's so obviously meant to be that. I can see why you can't say that officially, but come on now. And I noted that again, that Ava DuVernay she doesn't come out of radical activism or academia or journalism. She comes out of public relations and the Oprah Winfrey machine. So, which is why I wasn't surprised later on when she removed Kwame Ture from Selma. You're a public relations specialist. So I get it. And I get that's why I could see and I get it. Like if that's the crowd you want to move in, I'm easily avoidable. So why not just avoid me? Not literally, because I've been jumped literally, and that's no fun. I don't want no parts of that. But yeah, intellectually, yeah, man. Because listen, and then we can wrap up. But like, listen, I legit, everybody, straight up, everybody, all everything aside, I want us to win. If winning means I have to be exposed as wrong, so be it. If winning means I have to be marginalized and excluded, so be it. That's fine. So I'm never, I may be bothered by the exclusion, but I'm never afraid of the loss, in putting my ideas on the table and having them be shown as insufficient or wrong. The only thing I'm ever afraid of is that I won't adequately in that moment represent them. So even I remember at the beginning of the whole back and forth with the reverse hashtaggers, I was trying to say, like, because they backed out of a paid gig to debate me. And I remember my response was, I hope it's personal. And I hope it's because I've misrepresented the ideas. So please, if you ignore me, engage the ideas. That is Pan-Africanism, socialism, radical Black liberation, traditional struggles, blah, 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 blah. If Jared isn't representing those ideas properly, which is often the case, or sufficiently, that's all, then go address them from somebody better and leave Jared alone. That's cool. But engage him. Don't dismiss the ideas because Jared was flawed in his presentation of them. Like, don't do that. First of all, that puts too much pressure on me. Like, I got to get everything right, or you're going to abandon radical struggle. That's not fair. And if I'm wrong and your ideas are better, let's do them. Anyway. All right, good people. I really appreciate you all in the chat. I see that you all having, again, the vigorous conversation that definitely Yvette Carnell. I think Tone was invited to that one too. But I believe it was both of the two founders. And we were going to get, for them, maybe not a lot of money, but it was going to be, I think I was going to get $1,000. Because that's for me, that's money. I remember Peniel Joseph charged Morgan State $6,000 and told me that was his HBCU discount price. I was like, $6,000 was your discount price? Good God. Good for you, brother. I think that's what I even said to him. Because he showed up at Morgan years ago, and I was like, I just want to shake your hand and tell you I think we disagree, and I look forward to reading the work and discussing it with you. And that's when he told me that. I was like, yeah, he said that was his discount price. I said, discount? $6,000 is a discount? And then come to find out, it is. It is. But yeah, I think she turned down, it was $1,000 we were going to get each. Something like that. I was like, shoot, I'll take an intellectual L for $1,000. If I'm wrong, if soda is incorrect, show me, lay it out. And I'll take $1,000 for that. Oh, I know. It's crazy. No, I know. They're getting $30,000, $20,000. I saw somebody who wrote some book recently was getting, I think, offered 40 at Morgan State. 40,000. I'm like, yeah, Lee. Oh, maybe I do need to write. I used to talk about, I was going to joke. I jokingly used to say I'm going to write how Obama's, my book, my sellout book was going to be how Obama changed my life. And it's subtitled something like from from mixed and black and radical to just mixed. Something I was like, I was gonna have a whole. I just had a whole fun thing with the whole thing for years. I was like, I'm this close, about to write my book. Now I might have to come back and write my Kamala Harris. My Kamala Harris book changed my life. Kamala changed my life. With a colon and say, a subtitle, New Mixed Visions, or A Better Blackness, something. Get and get rid of all of you Black Power Media remixers. Get rid of all of this nonsense. Be like, what did Hillary want Obama to say about Farrakhan that day? Do you disavow Farrakhan? I disavow Farrakhan. I disavow Black Power Media. I disavow the remixers. Damn some soda. Give me that 40 grand speaker fee. We did it, Joe. There it is. That's it. With a picture of me and Kamala Harris on the cover. We did it, Joe. That's it. How drinking woke. Oh, I love it. The new soda. Cola, baby. I don't drink soda no more. I'm on the cola. You know what? Let's ride out with this again, man. If I'm going to get copyright hit, let's get hit for real, because this joint was funny. I'm not funny. I'm having fun. Listen, everybody, I'm going to leave this with you as your moment of zen. As they used to say, and peace if you're willing to fight for it. I really had a good time this morning. I hope you did as well. Please share, like, subscribe, all of that good stuff. And let's ride out with this right here. Take care, everybody. Be safe. Enjoy yourselves.
January 6th. And you seen all those Caucasian people running up on the Capitol. Mm-hmm. And all I said, and I will say it again, I wish I was a police working that day.
Right.
Oh, I would have been pat. They're like, what you doing? Saving democracy.
Yeah. Give me a reload.
Yo, man.
Can you imagine if that would have happened at the Million Man March?
Oh, man. It'd be a million man. It would have been a million black men dead on the steps.
Yeah,
you know that and I know that.
Yeah, man. What did you feel when you were watching that?
I just wish I was working it.
Right, yeah.
Oh, I would have shot every one of them. They would have to prove they wanted to overturn them. Right. They would have to prove. I would have been John walking at the pow, 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 sliding down, pow, pow, John Wick, pow, 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 pow. Man.
Grabbing other people's guns. You
ain't going to use it. Give it to me.
Yeah. I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like.